All right, so we've got a ton of stuff on Meta platforms today. Earnings calls, analyst opinions, all their financials, everything. We're going to figure out if Meta is a buy or not. And you know what? It's not so easy.
Well, what's really interesting here is that it's almost like two completely separate companies, right? You've
Hmm.
got the old reliable stuff, the stuff that everyone knows,
Yeah.
and then you've got, the stuff that we're not so sure about.
Exactly. So we've got the family of apps, right? Facebook, Instagram, all the big names, and they're bringing in the cash. But then on the other hand, you've got Reality Labs, and that's where, things get a little bit complicated. So maybe let's just start with the basics. What does Meta even do these days?
Well, on the one hand, I mean, they're still at the very top when it comes to social media. Their family of apps has something like 3.2 billion daily active users. I mean, that's basically like a whole continent of people using their apps every day. And that gives them a huge advantage when it comes to ads. That's where the bulk of their revenue comes from, still.
You're totally right. It's kind of an unfair advantage in a way. They've got this audience that every advertiser on the planet would love to get in front of. But then you look at the other side, and you've got Reality Labs, which is this whole different thing.
Yeah, Reality Labs is really their metaverse play. They've got the VR headsets, the software, the tools for building stuff in the metaverse. They're putting a lot of money into making these digital worlds, these immersive experiences, and it's a really long-term plan, and it's not cheap at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're running a marathon and at the same time trying to invent a jetpack, right?
Yeah.
It could be a super high reward, but it's also really high risk.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of all that, you've got their financial situation to think about. So, in their last earnings report, they had revenue growth of 19% year over year, which is pretty impressive. That put them at $40.59 billion dollars for Q3 of 2024, which, not bad at all. But then you see how much they're spending. They're spending billions and billions of dollars on AI and Reality Labs.
Okay, so let's just break this down a little. I mean, for someone who isn't, spending every day looking at financial statements and that kind of thing, what are the most important things to pay attention to if we want to figure out if Meta is actually doing okay financially?
Well, their revenue is definitely strong. It's mostly driven by family of apps, like we were talking about before. But their earnings per share, or EPS, has been going down because of all this investment they're making. What that means is each share of Meta stock isn't making as much profit as it could be.
So does that mean that for investors, it's like a red flag,
Yeah.
especially if they're trying to make money in the short term? But then you've got market cap, which is like the total value of the whole company.
Right.
And Meta's market cap is at like $1.43 trillion.
Right, which basically means that people who invest in the stock market still believe in what Meta is doing,
Yeah.
even with Reality Labs and how uncertain it is.
So it's like this classic dilemma. Are they just spending a ton of money to grow in the future, or are they headed for disaster? What do you think is the main thing for someone to think about if they're thinking about buying Meta stock?
Well, I think the main thing is to really understand that they're trying to do two things at once. They've got this super profitable business already, but then they're also making these huge bets on the future.
Yeah, so they've got this balancing act going on, making a ton of money from social media, but then spending a ton of money on AI and this whole metaverse thing. Let's get into the details of those two things, because that's where things get really interesting, and maybe where we'll find out if Meta's is going to be super profitable in the future.
So, I think AI is a good place to start because that's where they're really making some big moves. It's not just about like making your apps better, it's about building completely new stuff.
Okay, so they're definitely spending a ton on AI, we know that.
Yeah.
But how are they actually using it? What are they doing?
Well, they're definitely using it to make the apps we already use even better. Think about like personalized feeds, better ads, even stuff like voice assistants or image recognition. All that stuff uses AI.
So it's like they're making the apps more engaging
Mm-hmm.
or even like addictive, to keep
Mm-hmm.
us using them more and seeing more ads.
Yeah, I mean, basically. But then they're also building these new tools that are powered by AI. Like Meta AI, for example, that's like their attempt to build a way to interact with technology that's more natural. And they're even making AI tools for businesses.
Oh, yeah. And then there's Llama, right? Their big language model. I think they've got like 500 million people using
Mm.
Llama every month, which is a lot. But what I don't get is why they're open sourcing it. Like, why would you give away something that could be a huge advantage over everyone else?
Yeah, that's a good question. On the surface, it doesn't seem like it makes much sense, but I think there's a strategy there. By open sourcing it, they're basically getting everyone to help them build it. More developers using it, more people finding ways to make it better. And in the end, that helps Meta.
So it's like a kind of a calculated risk. Like, They're thinking the benefits of everyone working on it will be bigger than the risk of someone else using it to compete with them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty bold move. I guess we'll see if it works out for them. But it shows how much they believe in AI and how important they think it is.
Okay, so AI is like the brains of Meta, I guess. Now, what about Reality Labs? That's more like the wild, unpredictable side. They're spending a lot of money on this metaverse thing, but is it actually going to be a real thing?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The metaverse is kind of uncharted territory. Meta's definitely in the lead when it comes to this stuff. But there's no guarantee that it'll be successful.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some cool stuff coming out of Reality Labs, like those Ray-Ban Meta AI glasses.
Yeah.
I think those are selling pretty well, which means that people are interested in this kind of technology.
Yeah, those glasses are a good example of how they're trying to blend the real world and the digital world together. They're stylish, they do stuff, and they're like a little taste of what augmented reality can do. And then they've got those new AR glasses coming out, Orion. Those are even more advanced.
But, let's be honest, the metaverse is kind of a niche thing right now. Is it too risky for them to be putting so much money into something that might not even become popular?
Oh, it's definitely a gamble. There are lots of challenges they need to figure out. Like, not many people are using it yet. The technology is really expensive, and there's all the privacy and security stuff to think about. And then just building these virtual worlds and making them fun and interesting to use is really complicated.
It's almost like they're trying to build a whole new internet.
Yeah, it's not easy, and it's definitely not cheap.
And then, you've got other companies doing the same kind of stuff, like Apple and Microsoft. They're investing a lot in AR and VR, too.
Right, so Meta isn't the only one in the race.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. But from an investment point of view, Reality Labs is a wild card for sure. It's hard to say if it'll be a huge success or a huge failure.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you see so many different opinions from analysts. Some of them think Meta is about to do something amazing, and some of them are much more cautious.
Well, speaking of analysts, let's talk about what they're saying about Meta's stock price. There are some pretty different opinions out there.
Yeah, on the optimistic side, some analysts are saying the price could go as high as $780. They think Meta is in a really strong position. They've got all those users, and they have a lot of potential with AI in the metaverse.
But then you've got the more pessimistic analysts. Some of them are saying the price could go as low as $583.
Yeah, they're mostly worried about profitability, competition, and all the regulations. They're worried about how much money they're spending on Reality Labs. And they're worried about more and more companies getting into AI. And then all the regulations about data privacy and antitrust stuff could be a problem too.
So it's like this classic risk versus reward thing, right? Meta could be a huge winner, but there are also some big risks to think about. So as an investor, what should you be thinking about?
Well, I think the most important thing is to think about how much risk you're comfortable with. Are you okay with investing in a company that's making these big bets on the future, even if those bets might not pay off right away? Or do you want something that's more safe and predictable?
Yeah, it's a tough decision. And I think before we move on, we should talk about the elephant in the room, the whole thing about regulation. Meta is always getting criticized for how they handle data, privacy, and misinformation. And then there's all the potential impact of their AI stuff.
Yeah, all that regulatory stuff isn't going away. It's probably going to get even more intense in the next few years.
So for someone who invests in stocks, that adds another layer of complexity, right? It's
Well,
not
yeah.
just about the financials and the strategy. It's also about the politics and the laws.
Right, and that's why it's so important to stay informed and do your research before you invest in anything.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about Meta being like the king of social media, and then their big plans for AI and the metaverse. It seems like they're always pushing the limits, but they also got some big challenges to deal with.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, right? I mean, they're this massive company making tons of money, but at the same time, everything is changing so fast in the tech world, so they have to be able to change and adapt really quickly.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting to look at them as a company. They've got this super solid business, but they also want to innovate and do new things. And that creates like both opportunities and risks.
Yeah, it's like they're juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle or something. Haha.
So let's try to put all of this together. What are the most important things for our listeners to remember? Like if someone was asking you if they should invest in Meta or not, what would you tell them?
Well, first I'd say, it's really important to understand that they're kind of two companies in one. You've got The family of apps, which is like a money-making machine, right? It's reliable, it's profitable, and it's still growing. But then you've got Reality Labs, which is this big bet on the future.
Right. And it could be a huge win for them, but it also might not work out at all. So it really depends on how much risk someone is willing to take.
Exactly. If you want something that's safe and predictable, Meta might not be the best choice. But if you're okay with taking a bigger risk for a potentially bigger reward, then it might be a good option.
So it's about understanding the trade-offs. You're basically betting on Meta to figure out how to make all this stuff work. Social media, AI, the metaverse, all of it, they've definitely been successful in the past, but there are definitely some big questions about their future.
Yeah, and don't forget about all the regulation stuff. Governments all over the world are looking at Meta really closely, and all those regulations could have a big impact on their business.
It's definitely a lot to think about. But that's what makes investing so interesting, isn't it? It's not just about numbers, it's about understanding the whole picture.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots, figuring out the risks and the rewards, and then making a decision that makes sense for you.
And sometimes, you just have to accept that we can't predict the future. We can look at all the data we want, but there's always going to be uncertainty.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes investing so exciting and scary at the same time. But one thing's for sure, Meta is going to be a big deal in tech for a long time.
So I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've talked about what Meta is good at, what their weaknesses are, and what their opportunities are. Now it's up to you to decide what it all means for you as an investor.
Yeah, and remember, this deep dive was just the beginning. Keep learning, keep doing your research, and keep asking questions. The tech world is always changing, and the investors who do well are the ones who stay informed.
Well said. So we'll leave you with one last thing to think about. Is Meta shaping the future, or is the future shaping Meta?
That's a good one. Until next time, keep digging into the details and stay curious.
And as always, happy investing.